The first major battle of consequence in the American Civil War in 1861 was the Battle of Bull Run, which was fought about a half hour south of modern day Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. Um, the battle was not very well conducted by Union troops. See, Union troops from Washington, D.C., were sent to squelch a Confederate military force 30 miles south of the American capital. And they squandered an opportunity, and even though Confederates, who were somewhat disoriented, were able to beat back a Union military effort that was highly disorganized. And in doing so, the Battle of Bull Run would become a Confederate victory, further invigorating the Confederate cause and demoralizing the United States federal troops. So the Battle of Bull Run sets things off on a course in the American Civil War to where you're going to have a renewed sense of confidence in the Confederate cause and somewhat of a demoralization due to lack of leadership and strategy by Union troops. Simultaneously, at that time, the state we know it as Virginia used to actually be bigger than it is. See, the western half of Virginia at that time was basically right smack in the middle of the Appalachian mountain chains. And you had quite a number of mountain folk who didn't really see a point to slavery. Virginia was a slave state. The folks out in the western part of Virginia were not pro slavery. They didn't have a need for it, they didn't want to be associated with it. So, in that year, folks in western Virginia coordinated with the United States federal government to secede from Virginia, thereby entering the United States of America as the state of West Virginia. So you have West Virginia seceding from a Confederate state, which is ironic, um, and being admitted into the United States as the state of West Virginia. Okay, so that's how West Virginia was established. The state as we know it as Virginia used to be a lot bigger than it was until West Virginia broke off and all the mountain folks left therein. Okay. There were two different theaters in the American Civil War. You had your Western theater out towards the Mississippi River in South Gulf Coast. Then you have your Virginia theater out east. Okay. On the Western theater side, the United States naval powers successfully blocked major ports along the southern Gulf Coast, especially New Orleans. Confederate commanders figured that the United States would come after New Orleans. They just thought that they would come from the north. When in reality, American naval power was able to enter into New Orleans by going up the Mississippi River mouth and making their way shortly up to New Orleans, and then seizing the city therein afterwards. The Confederacy's largest city would now lay at the hands of the Union. And that would begin a strategy of Union troops further going up the Mississippi River as now being able to block New Orleans from resupplying the Confederacy. They're now able to go up the Mississippi River and obtain various different powers and control all the way up to modern day Memphis, Tennessee. You have the Battle of Shiloh, the Battle at Murfreesboro, that established Union control out west. The Union, in short order in 1861 and 62, would control the Mississippi River all the way on down to New Orleans and the Louisiana Gulf Coast. So, not only that, as there were Confederate sympathies in places like Kentucky and Tennessee, that would soon be squelched because they were still in the Union at that point, but then they were further entrenched with Union control at that point, too. So, for lackluster effort in places like Bull Run, south of Washington, D.C., out west in places like Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee and in New Orleans, the United States Union federal troops had large successes in strategizing their power control in the Western theater. In Virginia itself, of course, the Union troops were demoralized at the Battle of Bull Run, when even though Confederate forces were somewhat disorganized and disoriented, they were able to beat back Union troops. That was a problem. And then, not only do you have Robert E. Lee running very strong campaigns, even with smaller numbers of troops in Virginia, you also had other Confederate leaders like Thomas Jackson, also known as Stonewall Jackson, who was able to thwart the advances of a number of Union Army movements and soundly defeat them until he actually was accidentally killed by some of his own troops. Pretty interesting how that happens, right? Some of his own troops mistook him for a Union leader and accidentally shot him. Oops. Stonewall Jackson was very successful in Virginia until, like I said, he was killed. Otherwise, though, you have Confederate movements in and around Virginia that would lead to a stalemate at best for the Union cause. The Confederates wreaked havoc all over Virginia. They were either winning battles against Union forces by having better strategy and better leadership, or they were in the very least drawing out very, very narrow losses that would be very costly for Union troops. So from that perspective, the Virginia front, unlike the Western front, was drastically different than what was going out towards New Orleans and whatnot. So you're doing great on one side, not so great on another. And we talk about other things that would lead rise to ultimate strategy and how things would change.